Hello and welcome to another episode of Impact Nuggets. My name is Nat King. So good to have you join us for tonight's discussion. Last week we looked at picking yourself up, the importance of picking yourself up from disappointing news, from disappointing situations, the importance of not staying discouraged, and rather knowing how to come out of discouragement and as quickly as possible. And even better still, how to stay within a cycle of encouragement by really, by putting certain mechanisms in place. We discussed a few of those, including designing an effective motivational system, which is your responsibility and my responsibility. So anyway, that was last week. And we're going to be discussing something else this week. But before we go into that, please don't forget to like, to share, and also to subscribe so that you don't miss out on content that we're going to be producing in the future. And also, please, if you're on Facebook, hit the follow button. That'll be wonderful. Okay, so let's dive into this evening's discussion. So what we're discussing this evening, like the name suggests, we are going for growth. We are growing. We are going for growth. So we're going to discuss growth, not just this evening, but also next week, potentially the week after as well. And that will not even be enough, nowhere near enough to fully exhaust, or even go anywhere near, going deep into the topic of growth. Is very, very broad, but it's a very important one. It's one that we shouldn't take lightly at all. If we are people of, people of impact, if we aspire to influence more and more people, if we aspire to command greater value, then growth is something that you cannot do without, you must not do without. All right. So when it comes to growth, one of the things that one of the absolute fundamentals we need to understand is that every single one of us, trapped inside of us, is a set of seeds. These seeds, can include your gifts, your gifts, your talents. And oftentimes these things are not really worked on. The same way that we would find it abnormal for a 5-year-old child to be at the same size as a typical 2-month-old baby. We also need to find it abnormal if we don't grow at all within the space of 5 years, or within the space of 10 years, or within the space of 20 years. We should find it quite abnormal and quite concerning. And therefore we need to give attention to areas of our lives that have been neglected, right? That have been neglected for a long time, which are critical, which may be quite critical. Now we're all different, So my critical points may be different to yours, right? They may be different. So it's one of the things that we need to be aware of. And also when it comes to growth, personal growth, it requires a high sense of awareness, self-awareness. But we're going to go into that further down. But going back to seeds, every single one of us has it, and seeds really talk about potential. They talk about what could be a reality that could be, oftentimes a better reality that could be, which isn't quite yet right now in the immediate. And so, oftentimes people get frustrated. People get frustrated when these, when the seeds are not given room to express themselves, when they're not given expression, right? So whatever your potential is, your potential or potentials or set of potentials are waiting for expression. They need expression, right? They need expression in order for you to have fulfillment. In order for you to have fulfillment, and so it's very important that we start working on these various seeds. I remember the late Dr. Miles Monroe, someone I admired a lot. He used to say this a lot, that the wealthiest place on earth is not in the gold mines and the diamond mines and all these other mines where you have so many great natural resources. What he was saying was that the wealthiest place on earth is actually in the cemetery. It's in fact in the cemetery, because in the cemetery is where you have lots and lots of unfulfilled potentials, unfulfilled realities, unfulfilled realities. So many people go to their grave with so many could have beens, right? So many could have beens and should have beens, which never happened. And so, as we're discussing this tonight, also next week, and perhaps the week after as well, I want you to start thinking about, certain areas of your life that are critical, which have neglected, which you've neglected for some time, which you haven't really given much attention to. When it comes to growth, we grow in so many different areas. So, for example, if you want to grow in your career, if you want to increase, if you want to become a manager, if you aspire to become a director, perhaps, or even a CEO one day, one of the things that you need to do is to grow in the skill sets, grow in the competencies that are required to fill in those positions, right? So it requires growth. If you want to become a better person, a better human being that people will like, one things that you need to work on is your character, right? So improve on your character as a person. If perhaps you want to become a better parent, or you want to become a better spouse, an area to focus on could be what? Relationships, right? Focus on improving in the area of relationships. What are the keys? What are the necessary principles that are required? What are the necessary actions that are needed to be taken in order for us to become better, our relationship? So, like I said, if someone wants to enrich their soul, if you want to enrich your soul, then perhaps you need to invest in your spirituality, right? So there are so many different areas by which we can, that we can grow. There's so much room. There's so much. So it's not just in the area of our careers or business, but it affects every single aspect of our lives. But there's something that I'll say, which is activity is not the same as growth. Activity is not the same as growth. We sometimes confuse so much activity to be growth. We think that they're the same, and they're not necessarily the same. For example, someone could be working very, very hard. You could work very, very, very hard every single week, every single day. Your day is full of task after task after task. And yet, and yet come the end of the week, you haven't grown a single inch. At the end of a typical month, at the end of a typical year, you haven't grown at all, because activity is not the same as growth. Activities is just basically you getting things done, right? You just getting things done. Whereas growth looks at how big, it looks at scope, right? It looks at scope, it looks at capacity. So activity is not equal to growth. Right? Activity is not equal to improvement. Hard work is not the same as improvement. Even though hard work, of course, is a very necessary part of the success formula, right? The formula that is needed for success. But hard work, like I said, is not the same as growth. So when it comes to growth really requires a plan. You need to have a plan in place for you to be able to grow effectively. At least for the vast majority of the time, you need to have something in place. You need to have a plan. What are the intentional strategies? So when it comes to growth, a major principle of personal growth is what is to have a high level of intentionality, a high degree of intentionality. John Maxwell puts it this way. It says, to reach your potential, you must grow, and to grow, you must be highly intentional about it. I'll repeat that. So to reach your potential, you must grow, and to grow, you must be highly intentional about it. Right. So, if you don't sit down to carefully plan how you're going to grow in any area of your life, whether it's even improving, an area of music, whether it's to improve your writing, whether it's to improve your speaking. If you don't sit down to articulate how you're going to do that, right, to actually write it down, right, and also put in place the steps, the actions that are required for you to be able to accomplish that, it's not going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. Well, at least for most of the time. In some very, very, very rare circumstances, it can actually happen, right? It can actually happen. But let's not take those fluke circumstances as the norm, right? Let's not take them as the norm. So let me give you an example of one of those fluke ones. It's something that actually happened to me a few years ago. So when I was in year nine, so that I was around the age of 14 at the time. So when I was in year nine, I was the fourth fastest in my year, in 100 meters. I was the fourth fastest. The following year, so when I was in year 10, I was the fastest. Because at the start of each athletics season, the fastest guys would run a race, and then out of that, the teachers would be able to, identify who was going to be our main 100-meter runner, who was going to be our main 200-meter runner, and which people were going to be in the 4x100 relay and all that stuff. So I ended up becoming the fastest a year later. So that was in year 10, and I was shocked. I think I wasn't just the only one who was shocked, but I was shocked myself. I was thinking, whoa, because I didn't just beat the guys, I whooped them, right? I whooped them, which I was shocked about. So this actually puzzled me for a little while, and I was trying to figure out how exactly did this thing happen? How did this thing happen? And I think a few months later, it just dawned on me one day. It just hit me. Pow! Oh, it's because in between year 9, me being year 9, and year 10, I started doing paper rounds. So for those of you who may not be familiar with that, you basically go to a shop, like a corner shop, usually a convenience shop, and you go and get some stuff. So you go there. Usually in the mornings, you get the papers, and you basically go around certain houses and you deliver them, to those who've subscribed to those papers. So anyway, I usually did that on my bike, on my bicycle. So and I used to do that every single day, 7 days a week, every single week, every single month. I think the only time in the year that I didn't do my paper rounds was on Christmas Day. That was the only day in an entire year that I didn't do my paper rounds. So you can imagine every single day I hop on the bike and I go on the paper rounds. Imagine that every single day I was exercising. I was building up muscles every single day, and also building stamina, which is something I didn't realize because I always wanted to beat my time. I always wanted to be done within a certain time frame, right? And so that also improved my stamina. Now, I didn't realize that at the time, of course. I didn't realize. I just thought it was a nuisance, right? Getting up every single morning before going to school, to the paper rounds. So the point is that later on, I ended up becoming the fastest, right? Ended up becoming the fastest simply because I was growing daily, even though I hadn't planned it that way. I didn't realize that that was going to be the effect of it. Now, that is an exception. That is an exception. In some fluke instances, these things do happen, but those are not the norm. The norm requires a growth plan, what we call a growth plan. In other words, you need to sit down and you need to decide, okay, so this is what I decide, this is what I desire to be, or I desire to do within the next perhaps 6 months or within the next year. Or it could even be a longer term one. It could be 5 years or 10 years. What are the things that you need to put in place? If you want to become a brilliant author, you probably need to start writing. First of all, you need to start writing. Just start writing. A great mentor of mine some years ago used to say to me, he used to say to us, not just myself, but he used to say this a lot. Do you want to know how to start something? I remember the first time I heard him say that, I was thinking, no, go on, tell me. And he said, by starting it. I was like, oh, like really? What? That simple? And yes, and it is that simple. The best way to start something is by starting it. And the best way to get in ahead, Mark Twain will say, the best way to get in ahead is by starting, right? So you need to put plans in place, a growth plan. We're going to go into this next week, hopefully. So you need to put a growth plan in place. You have to be intentional about it, because it's not going to happen automatically. It's not just going to happen by itself until you determine for it to happen. Okay. And so, growth plan, very, very necessary for improvement. Now, when it comes to growth, when it comes to personal growth, we need to also recognize that personal growth can be very costly. It can be very, very costly. It's not something that, it's not something oftentimes that just happens at no cost. Now, the costs, there are so many different types of costs, right? The financial cost is just one aspect of or the various types of costs that may be necessary for you to improve. So, for example, you could even have relational costs. Sometimes you may have to leave certain relationships, right? You may have to leave certain friendships, certain people that are not good for you, for where you're going, right? If you're setting, okay, so for example, you're setting a goal that you want to quit smoking. You want to quit smoking, and yet all your friends are are heavy smokers. I mean, they smoke like chimney. Every every 5 minutes they're going for a fag. Every 10 minutes, that's it. You're if you quitting entirely is something that is big to you, right? And you want to improve in that area, and also in your health, you need to basically you need to be careful of some of the friends that you may have around you, or some of the relationships. So sometimes it may cost you certain relationships. Yeah, financial cost is a very obvious one. Is the obvious one. You might need to pay for a new course. You might need to pay to go on a new program. There are so many different costs, financial costs. That is the very typical, the very obvious one. But you also have different one, relational costs. What other costs do you also have? You also have time costs. Time cost. It can take your time. It can require a lot of time for you to improve in certain areas. Whereas you could, whereas before you could just get up and sit behind the TV for 2 hours watching your favorite TV shows. All of a sudden, you may not have that time. Why? Because perhaps you need to spend more time reading in a particular area, reading in a particular field, or actually listening to certain podcasts, perhaps. There are so many different things. When it comes to costs. I think we might start off with that next week, and then we're going to go into the growth plan. We might make a start to that next week. That is that for us time wise. Of course, we've got a lot more to discuss, but we can't really go into it because of the time. So I hope that you're able to join us. Hope you're able to join us next week for another episode of Impact Nuggets. Please do not forget to like, to share, also to subscribe so that you don't miss out on our content that we produce. If you're on Facebook, like I said earlier, hit the follow button. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Keep thinking about the costs, right? Keep thinking about the cost. Are you ready to pay the price? Are you ready to pay the price? Are you ready to do what it takes, or what is required for you to grow, for you to have that desired goal, right? That you have been desiring for a long time. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and catch you next week for another episode of Impact Nuggets. My name is Nat King. Bye-bye.